Today we're going to talk a little bit about doing transactional research. I'm going to break this slideshow into two parts. The first part we're going to talk about getting company information from public companies using SEC filings. And the second part we're going to review some information about finding forms that you might be able to use for transactional type tasks. So some basic tasks you might be asked to do as a summer or first year associate, if you're a corporate associate, is to do due diligence. Due diligence is basically collecting and reviewing major contracts and formation documents and other important contracts, leases, other important company information. You might be asked to prepare a disclosure schedule in conjunction with a merger. You might be asked to draft other model documents such as a letter of intent. You might do competitive intelligence, such as we've talked about, finding out about directors of a particular company, or competitive intelligence about the company that is a potential acquisition target. And then you could do more traditional type research. For example, you could look into SEC rules, and that might inform your drafting of particular contracts, or you might have a compliance issue that you need to deal with in terms of when you're doing a transaction. If there's a change of control, you might have some compliance issues with a public company, or if you have a regular corporate client, there might be compliance issues that come up. So the steps that I'm going to go through for a new transactional test, they're going to sound really similar to what we've been talking about all along for doing research. It's just the sources we're going to use are different. So the first thing you're going to want to check are secondary sources. So if you need to find out a definition, if someone says to you, go draft a bear hug letter, and you don't know what that is, you need a secondary source that helps you find out what those terms mean. If you're working on a stock purchase, you might need a checklist so that you know all the steps that you need to go through, make sure that you have all the correct documentation. And also secondary sources, if you're doing more traditional corporate law research, it could lead to primary law sources. So when we're talking about secondary sources, we might be talking about a traditional treatise material that could be on something that has to do with a merger and acquisition context, or we could be talking about secondary sources, meaning information about a particular company. Then we want to find the appropriate source for our primary material. So what's the best database that we're going to look at if we want to collect, for example, SEC 10K filings of a particular company? Then we're going to gather up all that pertinent information, and as with a lot of research tasks or a lot of tasks, legal tasks, we might have follow-up questions. So what are the secondary sources we could use? We're going to look at Lexis, and for us, we're going to look at Lexis.com at their transactional advisor. Lexis has a new product that's on part of its Lexis Advanced Suite that we don't have access to. So that might be something you see at a law firm, but for now I'm just going to show you what it looks like on Lexis.com because that's what we have access to. On Bloomberg Law, we're going to look at the transactional resources, which Eric showed us briefly. We've looked a little bit at Practical Law Company, and I suggested this as a good resource tool for model forms. There are additionally some materials on Westlaw. There's materials on CCH and Teleconnect. There's some BNA securities and corporate law materials, and there's another product that we have called dearlawyer.com. Because we have limited time to discuss all of the resources we might have, I'm going to focus on the ones that I've bolded here. So in terms of public company information, that's going to be the easiest to find. Private company information is a little bit harder to discover. Public companies are required to disclose certain types of information because they're selling securities on the securities exchanges. So they're required to, for example, disclose their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, material contracts, leases, subsidiaries. So all of that kind of information you can find in public filings. On Lexis.com, we're going to use the transactional advisor, and we'll look at that in a minute. On Westlaw, we're going to use business information and or public records would be the spot that we would go. On Bloomberg Law, we can use companies and markets to find that company information. Edgar is our free government website that has all of our SEC filings. Same kind of information we're going to be able to pull on Lexis or on Knowledge Mosaic or on Westlaw, but we might have a better search interface if we're using it through Lexis, for example. More and more companies themselves are putting their public company information on the web, so we can always look there. And other databases that you might have access to, that you definitely have access to at BC and that you might see when you're at work. One of them that we're going to look at is called Knowledge Mosaic, and the other one, which is a database you might see, though we're not going to look at it today, is Mergent. That's a BC research database, so from the regular Boston College, not the law school research database list. So I'm talking a little bit about SEC filings. These are the filings that public companies are required to file. When we're looking at SEC filings, one of the most important filings we might look for is the 10K or annual report. And I've given you the types of information that are listed in the annual report. One of the most important things that we're going to look at is the exhibit list, because then we can look at all the material contracts, so contracts that are important to the company. If you want to learn about other types of filings, I've given you a link that has some more brief descriptions of the filings. So when we're using public company filings, we're going to look at the annual report, the 10K, which comes out, of course, once a year. And then if we want to see if there's been any changes, say there's been a new director or an officer put in place, there's been a new material contract, there's two places that it might happen. An 8K, which is a filing that updates information, so there's a requirement to file within a certain amount of days. An 8K that lists important company information. The other place we might see other types of contracts or information about what's happening with the company, including updated financial information, is the 10Q, which is the quarterly filing, and it comes out, as you may have guessed, 4 times a year. So let's take a minute to look at some of the sources I've mentioned so far. Oh, and here's just a quick slide about what I was saying. The Form 10Q, the quarterly form, updates the 10K, and the Form 8K, it's for unscheduled events or corporate changes that are required to be filed under the SEC rules. So the first place we're going to look is at Knowledge Mosaic, and that's off the BC Law Library database list. And we can look at disclosures and transactions. If you needed more help, this support tab also is really good. They have a lot of information there. And you can see there's a lot of other information available here, including primary materials such as the SEC laws and the rules, and also agency materials. But we're going to concentrate on disclosures and transactions. So this is the Knowledge Mosaic page, and I've already clicked on disclosures and transactions. You can see that we can look up all the filings for a particular company by company name, ticker. You can look up just the 10K, or you can look up just the 8K, which are those unscheduled filings. So we're going to look at the 10K. Let's just pick a company here. And you can see that their most recent 10K was filed in November of last year. And so if we were curious as to what had happened and we wanted to update that, we could see if there's been a 10Q filed since then or any important 8Ks. And we can look at the information from the 10K in various formats. Just open the PDF here. And these are the different, if you've never seen a 10K before, it talks about the company, the business, risk factors, so things that might affect the company. If the staff has made comments, they have to resolve those comments or disclose why it's unresolved. Properties that are owned, any important legal proceedings that the company might be involved in, information about executive officers, all types of financial information, And then they also have to list any sort of exhibits and financial statements are included here in item 15. So on my PDF at least, the clickable links weren't working, so I switched over to HTML format because I wanted to be able to easily get to the exhibit list. So when it's in the HTML format for the 10K, I can click right on it. And when I scroll down, it tells me all the different exhibits of the company. And it's not necessarily filed with this 10K, but I can see which filing I would have to go to if I wanted to take a look at the certificate of incorporation for Disney or the bylaws. And those are both under number 3. In terms of important contracts, that's going to be in number 10. And again, it may not be filed, it could be filed with this particular 10K, but a lot of times, for example, this one's filed here with, but a lot of times if there's something we're interested in looking at, we're going to have to go pull another filing. This list is just telling us where it's filed. Okay, so what we did was we went to Knowledge Mosaic from our database list. We picked disclosures and transactions, and then we looked for the most recent 10K or annual report for Disney. And from there we can read the 10K to get some information, background information about the company and its officers and directors, and we can also look at the exhibit list to find important contracts and formation documents. Okay, so that was a little bit about using Knowledge Mosaic. On Bloomberg Law, there's going to be 2 different tabs we're going to use if we're corporate associate most often, and that's going to be companies and markets or transactional law. And we won't run a full-blown search like we just did, but let's go out to Bloomberg Law and look at these 2 resources. So when we're on Bloomberg Law, we've done a lot in the Search and Browse tab. We've used the Legal Analysis and News tab quite a bit. We've used Litigation and Dockets. Now we're going to look at the Transactional Law tab. So this tab, we can look up Edgar information, which are those 10K filings we were just looking at on Knowledge Mosaic. We can also pull different documents and clauses, so examples for deals. And we have treatises, so secondary source materials here as well. Under companies and markets, again, we can search Edgar. We can also get a little more company information in this tab. So those are the 2 tabs that you would most likely be in if you were looking for company information or model forms on Bloomberg Law. So this is a picture of the SEC Edgar website, and I've given you the URL. And you can also run searches here. It's just that your search mechanism isn't as advanced, but this is where all the underlying SEC filing documents, this is where Bloomberg's pulling it from, this is where Knowledge Mosaic's pulling it from. And you can again go by company name or ticker symbol, and you can use an advanced search, which can be helpful. There's also this nice guide, Researching Public Companies through Edgar. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about what Edgar is and the types of information you're going to find here, this is a good guide right here at the SEC website. Okay, so let's stop really quickly here and do one more little research challenge. We want to go to the sec.gov Edgar site, and we want to see if Office Depot has a shareholders' rights agreement, which if you've taken corporate law, you may have heard this before. It's called a poison pill, so it's a defense mechanism. And how are we going to find that, and where could we find the text of the rights agreement? So let's run this research challenge. So this is the main SEC webpage. They have tutorials here. They have other information for filers. There's comment letters. There's requesting documents. So there's other information you can find on this page. But we want to look for company filings. And we're going to do an advanced search. And we're going to do, let's see, 2012. We're going to do Office Depot. And I'm looking to see if we can see the 10K really quickly here. Okay, so here's Office Depot. Here's the 10K. And so they break it up into different documents, the 10K and the different exhibits that are incorporated into the 10K. So let's take a quick look at the 10K. And we want to again be looking at the exhibit list to see if we can see if there's a shareholder rights agreement. And for some reason that link brought me to the top of the financial statements. Bear with me just a minute. Okay. And we want to be looking to see if there's a rights agreement. And we can see right here that Office Depot does have a rights agreement. It was dated October 24th, and it's incorporated by reference from an 8K that was filed on October 30th. So let's see if we can find that 8K so that we can look at the language of the shareholder rights agreement. So this is a defense mechanism. So if you were working for a client who was interested in acquiring Office Depot, this would be something that you would need to look for. So here's the 8K from October 30th. And here's the rights agreement. And you'll be able to look at this for your client. So lots of times when we're doing due diligence, we're going to be asking the target company for all of these types of documents anyway. But when a company starts doing research into possibly acquiring a target, a lot of times you'll be pulling together some of these basic documents if it's a public company, even before you ask the company you're looking to acquire for all of these documents to kind of get a head start. Okay, so we've talked about how to find public company information using their SEC filings, and we looked at how we would do that on Knowledge Mosaic and on the SEC website. You can also find SEC filings on Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg, so those are other sources. But I wanted to show you some other ways to find it if you have these other resources where you're working. Obviously, SEC.gov is a free source, so you can always use that one. So in the next part of this, we're going to talk or review finding forms.